we have that 7-pound ball of clay that I'm ready to throw on the wheel. And again, I'm doing everything the same. The only thing I'm doing different is probably applying more pressure because this is more clay. So I'm going to wet the wheel head, clean it off, throw it in the center, slap center. With larger amounts of clay, I would say each step might take a little bit longer. Definitely pulling and definitely centering will take longer because you have a larger surface area to work with. All right, I'm going to wet my hands, wet the clay, and I'm still placing my left palm against the clay, putting my right pinky against the bottom and sealing that up. And I'm going to center the whole thing on the outside first, so I have to move my hands up and down so that I can touch the whole surface. And now I'm going to raise up. So start at the bottom, push and cone. Now I'm going to lean into the clay. I might have to stand up so I can get my body weight over the clay and wait for the clay to respond. Otherwise, this thing might just pull the bat right off the wheel. All right, I forgot to mention that, yeah, you do need to use a bat for throwing in 2 sections because I have to take this bat off in order for the whole piece to be attached to it, to flip over and attach to the bottom piece. So I'm going to be making the bottom first and then the top second, and flipping the top part over and attaching to the bottom. All right, let's do another coning. I'm exposing the interior of the clay and pushing it off center. See how much longer this takes? There's just that much more clay.
Will you say that for the bottom half, I'm going to stick to the front camera, and the second half I'll do the close-up?
So for this part, we're going to keep the front facing camera going. And then for the second part, we're going to switch to the side views because it's basically the same thing. The only difference is for the second part, I'm opening all the way to the wheel head. So that will eventually be the top, the opening, and I want it to be open when I cut that off. Waiting for the clay to respond and move up. And this is 7 pounds. This is as much as I really feel comfortable centering and working with. Maybe 8 pounds. You know, I'm working my way up as well.
That's a great thing to add.
You might want to start just with 3 pounds of clay. 3 pounds of clay for each section, which will give you a 6-pound form. But it will definitely be the biggest thing you probably have ever made. So don't feel like you're cheating. There's no such thing as this idea of a cheater if you're doing this in 2 sections. It is the way that it is. All right. That's like saying if you're short and you need a ladder, that's cheating. Well, that's just the way it is. You need to use certain techniques and certain things to get what you need. All right, I'm going to wash my hands and wash the wheel head. Now I'm going to enter. So this takes a little bit more muscling. I'm going to lean up into the top and maybe even stand up a little bit to get what I'm looking for. All right, lean into the clay. And I'm going to leave about 1/2 inch at the bottom. And when I open, I'm gonna slide my middle finger off my thumb, because right now I'm pushing into the clay, into my thumb and pushing into the clay. But now when I open, I kind of need a little bit more support as I pull the clay open, because there's a lot of clay there. The other technique that you could do is if the first technique wasn't working where you're pushing your thumb in, you can use all 8 of your fingers and enter in this way. That way you have a lot of pressure pushing down into the clay. Kind of hurts. You know, if something hurts, don't do it. Find a way that doesn't hurt. All right, so I'm going to open the clay. Pull that toward my body. I'm waiting for the clay to respond. Don't throw it off center here. And I'm only opening 3 inches, just like I do with all my other forms. And compress. It's okay to be patient. Slow down. There's no rush in this process. Notice my wheel is spinning at a nice, relaxed, medium speed. All right, here's that same technique I was teaching earlier. I'm pushing with my left palm, and I'm going to squeeze with my right hand, so my thumb against my right fingers on the outside, and I'm going to pinch and pull the clay up. And I want to do this pretty slow because I want to get a good amount of height out of this. So I'm anchored, elbows are anchored in, my forearms are pushing against the trays. And the same amount of pressure I'm pushing in with my left palm, I'm squeezing and pulling up, and I'm moving my hands together. I am going to be making a bowl, so I want to make sure that I think about the thickness of the clay up here. We're going to take this opening and expand it to about 14 inches wide. As you expand clay, it gets thinner. So we want to make sure that we're not making our this first cylinder really thin at the rim, because if you start expanding a thin rim, it's going to fall apart. You won't have enough clay. So make sure that when you pull, you're not making your rim too thin. So this is about maybe a half to, actually an inch. This is an inch thick right here. So when we expand it out 14 inches or 12 inches, you'll have enough clay. And I'm also going to reinforce that rim by using the webbing and my index finger. And now I'm going to do my first pull, which is, I don't want to set myself up by pressing the bottom or gathering the clay at the bottom. Adding enough water, and I'm going to stand up, pinch, and for this form, we're making a large bowl. So I am actually pushing harder with my inside hand to expand the clay outward. We want to go slow and expand the clay so that we don't have a wobble in our bowl shape. Don't get ahead of the clay as well. Take your time, do all the right steps. All right, I'm going to set myself up for another pull. Pushing harder with my inside fingers, pinching and moving up and out. Your hands could cramp at this point. If they cramp, I would stop, take a break, and come back to it. So I'm not going to go all the way to the rim. I want to make sure that my rim is thick enough. Remove the water from the inside, clean it off. Right. Okay, one last pull here. And then the rest is going to be shaping, compressing, double ribbing, and measuring. Pinch, 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 pull, upward and out. Starting to get dry, so I'm going to wet the surface. Go back where I left off. And then slow the wheel down. As the clay gets wider or taller, you always want to slow the wheel down so you have more control. All right, here is the tip for the rim. The rim, when we put these two pieces together, so we're going to put two parts together, we want to have one rim that's angled in and one rim that's angled out. So when we put them together, they have a lot of surface area to attach. So this one naturally is already facing outward. So I'm just going to establish that and make it go, make the angle outward. All right, let's do some ribbing. So we're going to take a stiff rib and we're going to clean up the bottom. Remove any extra clay there, and we're going to compress with our inside hand against the outside hand. So we're compressing and we're also doing a shape. What we're aiming for is a moon shape. So I want it round, so a half round, so a large half round bowl. When we get to the rim, hold the rim in one spot and wait for it to balance itself out. And then we're going to establish that angle and make sure that the rim is still thick. I think the worst thing that could happen is that when you pull this out wide, you don't have enough clay to attach the top piece on, and then you end up kind of struggling through that attachment later. All right, so we're going to expand this a little bit at a time. Now I'm going to talk about double ribbing for this form. So let me clean my hands off. The double ribbing is going to help compress the surface inside and out, because we want to remove as much of the slip on the inside as we do on the outside, because we want this thing to be in the leather hard stage when we attach the top piece on. So I'm using a kind of a stiffer Cheryl Mud Tools rib. I'm going to use the rounded side of this yellow rib, holding it from the inside. And you guys understand why there's a hole inside of a rib. It's so that you can put your fingers in there and the rib doesn't slip out. So that's what the hole's there for, if you're wondering. And then the outside, I'm going to use my stiff rib as well and hold on to it. And I'm pressing the clay together and compressing in one spot. It will take on this curve because it's a bowl shape, but I'm thinking about just one spot at a time. And starting at the bottom and pushing out, waiting for the clay to respond and touching at one spot. And this is actually not that hard of a pressure, but you have to have even pressure. Otherwise, you will push out too far and end up collapsing. Because I'm not using my fingertips, I have to be very sensitive to the amount of pressure that I'm pushing, because I can't feel what's happening. I can only really see it. I'm going to scrape off this clay. That's a good trick, to scrape one and then scrape the other, and then now you can get rid of it without having to remove them from your grip.
It shut down again.
Okay.
This is insane. What the fuck's doing?
I wonder where we stopped.
really sorry, man.
No problem.
I've never had this happen before. It just like, it's going, and then it just shuts down, and now it's...
Yeah, better the last one than the first one, right?
Kidding, I just don't... This is bananas. Because some people are getting thrown out and some people aren't. Like I rejoined and there's 8 people here. Let's just give people a second to come back. We're up to 9.
Yeah, sorry about the Zoom meeting. Keeps crashing on us.
Yeah, so people are like, I'm back.
Okay,
So it's
good.
throwing them out too. This isn't just...
Yeah, the great thing about this setup is that Curt has 2 cameras recording natively so that...
We were cut off before the first poll? Are you serious?
Before the first poll?
That's what someone said.
Okay.
We were cut off before the first poll.
What we're going to do is we're going to finish where I left off for the recording cameras, and then the second one is very similar to the first. So
yeah, this will all... The recording is still intact. I would stress that.
All right. Let's double check.
And these are both... Yeah, this is like Zoom servers. Yeah.
Okay, so double ribbing is important. You have to be sensitive to the clay because you can't really touch the clay with your fingertips. So you're just touching at one point on each of the parts of the rib. And you have to be gentle about the amount of pressure, the speed of the wheel. So I'm continuing to rib the surface and also give a nice round, half-rounded shape. Again, waiting for the clay to respond. There's a long way for that clay to go, all the way around. Now I'm really expanding the rim. And I can also throw it downward to get that nice rounded shape. We'll slow the wheel down. All right, I don't want to get the foot to belly transition too dramatic because it might collapse. The double ribbing helps a lot, and the heating helps a lot to keep everything from collapsing. So we're just going to leave it there and move on to our next step, which will be measuring the width and then heat drying the surface using the heat gun. All right, I want an even number. I don't want to have 12 and a quarter. I want either 12 or 12 and a half or, oh geez, it's 12 and a quarter, right? I don't want 12 and a quarter, so I'm going to expand this a little bit more to about 12 and a half. That's just me. I don't want to have to remember an odd number like that. So 12 and a half, I'm going to push out a little bit more at the bottom. I don't want 12 and a quarter. Oh, there it is, 12 and a quarter. Waiting for the clay to respond. And what I was measuring was the outside of the form, not the inside.
For double ribbing, any tips on the shape of the rib for the outside versus the inside?
Yes, the inside is
repeat it.
The tips for double ribbing. The inside rib is basically the shape of the inside of this bowl. Right, so I am touching at multiple points. The outside, I would say it could just be a stiff flat rib because you're pushing this against just one point. You could use the metal rib here and flex, right? So you're touching at more points. But when you're just touching at one point, you have less room for error, right? So you can correct one point. But if it's touching at multiple points, you have a lot of room where you could gouge into the vessel or throw it off center. All right, so after I measured that second time and expanded it, I am at 12 and a half. So I'm going to leave it there and heat gun both the interior and the exterior. I have 2 heat guns, but one for the both of you. But I would recommend just sticking with 1. I'm doing 2 because I want to get this done quicker, so we're not just watching me dry pots. What I'm looking for now is that when I kind of wobble it, it feels a little bit more stiff, and I'm looking for steam to come up. So it's not there yet, so I'm going to go over it past a couple passes more. Maybe you can see the steam coming off. I'll stop the wheel so you can see it. Definitely is turning that water into steam. I got a little aggressive at the very bottom, so I'm going to run some water over it and get rid of those little cracks that I got. Compress back into the clay. So heat gunning really only dries the surface at first. Time is going to allow the heat to translate into the core of the clay. So I'm doing the bottom section first and allowing that to dry up a little bit more than the top section, because the bottom section is going to support 7 more pounds of clay. All right. And now when I kind of wiggle this, it is a lot more firm. The steam is coming off. It means that water is evaporating. And I'm going to take this off. Remember our measurement, 12.5. And we're going to start our second one. We have 7 pounds of clay ready to go. That's all wedged up. Same process. There's only one thing that's different, or 2 things that are different. I'm going to make the same shape, the same form, but when I enter into the clay, I'm going to enter all the way down to the wheel head and expand the clay so that when I flip this over on top and I cut that bat off, it's open on the top. And the other thing that's going to be different is the rim. We're going to finish the rim angling inward so that when we put these together, they line up perfectly with 2 45-degree angles. All right, so I'm going to center, same way. Maybe I can field some questions here. Anyone have any questions about throwing multiple parts or throwing with a large amount of clay? I'm doing this in a moon shape, round shape. You could make just straight cylinders and stack multiple cylinders on top of each other. It's just, this is a foundation of what is possible.
I'm not sure I quite understand this. Someone says, does going all the way to the bat change the stability of the form as you throw?
So
I assume they mean pulling from the bat.
So does entering all the way to the bat change the stability of the walls? The only thing that it does is it releases more of the clay from the bat, so that there's only a ring of clay that's holding the clay to the bat. So when we're expanding or opening the clay, we want to make sure that we're pushing down on the surface of the clay as we're opening. And I'll give you those little tips too.
We are on the focus camera now, just so you know that.
Okay. So I'm going to use this extra slip here that's coming off and add that to my surface. And I think this is my third coning, and it feels good. The clay feels really good. It's moving. Lean into the clay, wait for the clay to respond. We don't want to create a mushroom top, and that would be because you're pushing too hard down. We want to push it off center. And now I'm going to clean my hands and move on to the next step. When you're throwing larger amounts of clay, you don't want the clay to be too wet, because then it might collapse, right? It won't hold its own weight. So removing the extra slip in the water for each step, I think helps with that, like the clay moisture level. So I'm going to enter, and I'm not going to stop. I'm going to go all the way down to the wheel head. Okay, once I get to the wheel head, we're going to open the clay up, but we're also pressing our palm against this ring of clay here. Because once we start pulling this open, we only have a smaller amount of clay that's attached to the wheel head, and we want to make sure that it doesn't come off. So I'm not pulling the rim open. All I'm doing is I'm using my fingertips and I'm pulling toward my belly. I'm opening about, again, 3-4 inches wide at the bottom. But I'm pushing down and opening. I'm going to lift this off the wheel head so I can show you what it looks like. Okay, so I have a ring of clay, and then this is all the way down to the wheel head, and it's opened up about maybe 3 or 4 inches wide at the bottom. So now we really have a donut shape. We're going to pull that donut shape up. We don't want to get ahead of the clay because we don't want to rip this thing off the wheel head or the bat. So I'm going to push it with my palm and squeeze with my right hand, my thumb on the inside, and pull upward, but waiting for the clay to respond.
Question says, it looks like the wall thickness of the first piece is about 1/2 inch. Is that about as thin as you'd recommend when throwing larger pieces?
It looks like 1/2 inch because of the way that it's angled downward. So it's probably closer to that 1/4 inch, maybe. What's in between 1/2 and 1/4? 3/8, I guess?
Yeah.
Okay, so 3/8 of an inch. I recommend, so for this demo, I'm actually leaving this large or thicker than I would. I would really push it in my studio, but for a live demo, I'm gonna play it a little safe today. I'm usually getting about 14 inches wide, and let's see, this is about 7 inches tall. So maybe I would get another inch out of that, and then an inch or 2 wider. But again, like I said, playing it safe so we don't have a collapse issue and we have to do this all over again. All right, I'm gonna bring this in. shaping takes a little bit longer. Remember, the clay has a long way to go all the way around. So you have to wait for the clay to take that full rotation before you start moving up. And your throw line should be, evenly spaced, close together. Remember, we are making a bowl shape. So our inside hand should be pushing against the outside hand harder than if we were making a tall cylinder. All right, I'm gonna set the rim right now because I wanna remember to keep it angled inward. So I'm gonna take my finger and give myself that 45-degree angle inward. Clay has a memory, so as it stretches, it's gonna remember that angle, and it will also remind me. All right, one more pull or two more pulls, I think.
Are you waiting each turn to pull up?
Yeah, so I'm waiting. Okay, I'm applying pressure right now, right? It's rotating 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm waiting that many rotations before I start pulling that clay up because I was still gathering the clay at the bottom. Now, I'm not waiting that many rotations because I just want to wait one rotation. So 1, right? 1, 2, 3, but I'm moving up the walls. And I'm keeping those throw lines even. But I slow down the wheel and I'm taking my time. One thing that I want to reiterate is that we're taking a cylinder shape and expanding it 12 to 14 inches wide. So you want to make sure that the cylinder that you start with, the rim is thicker, like about an inch thick. And then as you expand it, it gets to that 3/8 quarter-inch thickness. We don't want to run out of clay by pulling a really tall cylinder and then expanding it, and then your rim is like extra thin and you can't really attach two pieces together. And that's just a good trick when you're making bowls in general, or large bowls. All right, I'm going to do one more pull, and I'm pinching, pulling, and moving up and out into a bowl shape. Don't get ahead of yourself. Don't push too hard down here and then collapse the top. So you have to find that balance. Some water, and then the last pull, waiting. 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5 rotations. Now I'm moving up because I have gathered the clay. Waiting for the clay to respond, and I'm staying with this. This shape is a cone shape, right? I'm not really focused on making the rounded shape yet. And then when I get to the rim, I'm gonna let that rim even out and stay level and balanced before I take my hands off. Now during the shaping is when I'm going to turn this cone shape into a rounded shape. If I start rounding now, like I said, the clay is soft and has a lot more moisture in the surface, and I might collapse down here at the bottom. So I'm going to do the double ribbing again. I'm going to use this stiffer rib on the inside and my really stiff rib on the inside or outside, and this curved spot here is touching the clay, and then I'm pushing against just one point on the outside. I have to be sensitive to the amount of pressure I'm pushing, and I'm equally pressing from the inside to the outside. And then as I shape, I'm going to push slightly harder with my inside rib to expand. And then clean the rib and compress that rim, setting the 45-degree angle inward. another shape. Oh, that's what I was going to do. I was going to measure to make sure that I'm not past 12.5 inches. I don't think I am. I am at 11 3/4. So I know I can't expand the rim too much further. So here I'm pushing harder with my inside rib to create more of a round body. Holding steady with my outside hand. It's rested against the tray and my elbows tucked into my body. When I get to the rim, I'm going to slow the wheel down, hold my ribs in place, and slowly back off. And then set my rim at that angle, and then measure. All right, so we're almost at 12.5, a little bit more on the rim. These two shapes are not the final shape that I'm going to get out of my form. They're generally the shape. After I attach them, I'm going to spend time then to do my final shaping. Hopefully this didn't expand too much. It got a little bit wide. I knew it right when I was talking. I was like, ah. Okay, so I'm going to try and bring the rim a little bit closer. The other thing I could do is take this one back onto the wheel and expand it back to wider, about 12 3/4, which I might need to do. It's good to see mistakes being made and how I would correct them in the studio. Removing extra water at the bottom. Now I have a compressed surface. It's rib, double rib, and then I have a width of pretty close. It's 12, a little bit over 12.5. So let me just heat this, and then when I measure the bottom section, I'll expand it slightly just so that it matches this top. One of the challenges of using gas is that you need to have enough oxygen. So if the oxygen is used up on the interior of a pot, the flame will go out. So you need to be very safe about using a heat gun or a torch like that. I'm going to remove the clay at the bottom, which I forgot to do.
So I'm going to ask
earlier.
Since Kevin dried the bottom already, is there any chance of cracking if he stretches it out more?
No, it's still pretty wet on the interior of the clay, so I'm really just heating the surface to leather hard, and the interior where the soft clay is will allow me to stretch. It's not that dry, so you can see here it's soft leather hard. All right, I'm going to slip and score this piece first because I don't want to have to put it back on the wheel and slip and score it, and do my final measurement. So I am at 12 3/4, so I'm gonna have to expand the other one. I keep forgetting to repeat the question, but I hope you guys understood that one. It's like if there was any, since I'm heating the surface, is there a chance of?
It's hard to tell in the video just how much you're heating it, drying it.
Yeah.
It's
So
something you got to get a feel for.
So it is okay. When you first throw the piece, if you grab the rim and moved it, the whole rim would move. If now that I heated it, when I grab the rim and I move it, honestly only about this section of the rim moves because it's really stiff. You can kind of get the sense that it's going to take the weight by pushing on it. You can push on sections of it. If it's bouncing back and doesn't move the entire piece, then you know that it's ready to go. Also, the surface should feel like leather hard. It shouldn't be wet. It shouldn't be soft, like fresh clay is. It should be kind of leathery. So soft leather hard is what we're aiming for. So those tips will help. Now, when I'm slipping and scoring, I want to make sure that I slip and score that angle along with about 1/4 of an inch in and 1/4 of an inch out and around that connection, because there is going to be a lot of blending of the clay, and so you want to make sure that those areas that are slipped and scored when you blend them together. All right, this is getting exciting, guys.
Yeah. Make me wish I had like a month to just throw on the wheel.
Yeah. All right, we're switching. This bat system again is really helpful with that because I can place it in its little cutout and I'm ready to go. So I'm going to measure this. I know it's shrank a little bit because of the heat. So it's still at 12 1/2, so I'm going to expand it to 12 3/4. I might have to wet it so that it moves easier. I don't want to go beyond 12 3/4 because then I'm going to have to do the same thing to the other one. So measure.
Someone says expanding the rim is easier than narrowing the rim? Question mark. I can't tell if
Yes.
you're being facetious.
Yes. Expanding the rim is easier. And guess what I did, guys? I went to 13. This is great to watch. So I am going to try and make it more narrow by tilting the rim upward and holding it in place. And I hope that did it. If not, then we'll have to go back and forth. But that's good to see because I think that you're probably going to do this the first time you do it. All right, so I'm at 12 3/4. Nailed it. So we're going to slip and score around the edges, about 1/4 of an inch on the inside and on the outside. And then the fun will begin. I'm going to flip this over, right? Or flip over the top. If you flip over your piece and it starts to wobble and move like that, obviously it's way too wet. So you got to flip it back over and dry it. So that's a good sure sign that you have not dried it enough. Also, I'm doing this for the demo. You could just make 2 pieces, set them aside, and let them get to the leather hard stage. The tip with that is I would take a piece of plastic and run it over the edge so that the edge of the bowl doesn't dry quicker than the rest of it, which it will. So place a piece of plastic, not like all the way over it because you want the interior to dry, I would make a strip of plastic and then just fold it over the edge of both of them and let them dry to the leather hard stage. And then you can come back and slip and score and put them together. Okay. So both parts are slipped and scored. And when I flip this over, I don't want to flip it over my piece. Because if this does come off the bat, which it could, then I don't want it to ruin two parts. I just want it to ruin one. But I don't think it's going to because it's fresh. So here we go. Ready? Are you front facing or?
We're front facing.
Okay.
We are.
Here we go. And I'm looking that I want to attach it in one spot on this side, and then I'm going to turn it. And I did my measurement right, so it is perfectly aligned on all sides. Now, if it's not perfectly aligned, you might have to pick it up and kind of shift it and move it. That does kind of weaken the connection to the board, so you have to be gentle and careful. Make your measurements right up front and adjust them while they're rim side up before you flip them over. Make sure that they are spot on. 1/4 of an inch will change the diameter of this enough where you're going to run into problems of it not sticking together in one section. All right, the first thing I do is I take my finger and I push gently against the rim to help those sections kind of align and nestle into each other. And I can even hear the slip kind of like squishing out, which is a very satisfying thought and sound. I know I did it right. I'm keeping the bat attached to the top because I've trapped air. Air is a good thing right now because it's holding everything up or helping to hold everything up while I apply pressure in this center section. Don't cut this off until you've established this outside and it's blended or married together. So how do I do that? I use my rib tool, my serrated rib tool, and I start to create little wiggles all the way around. I can also do another blending. So I'm going to take this rib here and blend downward all the way around. And again, it takes time because it's the big pot.
And definitely a part that you want to spend time on.
This is the part that will crack, right? Because you're applying two pieces together. So I'm really actually taking the edges of the outside and marrying them together, like squishing them together. So I'm going to go now upward. And it looks ugly at first, but I'm going to spend the time to compress and get rid of all those little scrape marks. All right, scrape off any extra clay, and then I'm going to use a flat surface. Don't add any water. This is the time where you want to stay away from adding any water. Don't want to make it weaker. All right, now I know that seam is married on the outside. I'm going to cut this off and marry the clay on the inside. So I'm holding my string tool against the top of this bat and pulling it through. And there we have it. And sometimes there's extra clay here that I can cut off. Probably don't need as much, and I'm going to do it now before I start messing with the shape. So I just cut off an interior section so that the rim isn't so thick. If you need to cut off more, do it now before you start messing with changing the shape and making it weak. All right, the inside. The inside I'm going to use my finger at first. I'm not going to wet my finger. I'm just going to drag my finger across the surface and push right where that connector is. So you have two seams on the inside like this. And my finger is going to push against that seam outward against a rib tool, a stiff rib tool, to help kind of collapse the clay together on the inside. Slowly do this. So I'm going to rest my outside hand on the tray, I'm just barely touching the surface of that connector. Looking on the inside, I see that the seam is almost gone. Now I'm going to take my rib tool on the inside and use that for the remainder of the interior hand. Because I can't feel, I can't feel the edge of this rib, I have to be very gentle about the amount of pressure that I'm pushing outward. But I'm also going to kind of back it up with this rib here. So when I go on the inside, I have to hold the hole, and I have to hold my wrist at this weird angle. So that's what I'm pushing against here, and kind of I'll rotate the rib up and down here. So just gently rest it on that surface. All right, so now I cleaned up the interior and the outside. All right, now I'm gonna start to expand this so that I have a nice round clean surface. I'm gonna switch from holding it like this to holding it like this, starting at the bottom area. I'm gonna push out and then go up to halfway, and then I'll switch hand positions and probably go up like that. So my outside rib is exactly where my inside rib is. Now I'm going to push really hard against this area. So the way that I'm holding the rib on the inside is like this. My hand's getting tired, so I'm going to take a break. All right, I'm going back with that rib, which is straight right here, and I'm holding, maybe you can see the little bump where the rib is. This is probably the most pressure I'm putting on the piece to try and expand the top here. I'm not adding any more water either. That would be a dangerous situation.
Lorelai says you're doing great.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so I have a nice curve here. I'm going to repeat this curve over or down at the bottom. Okay, so think about this. Now I have this upside down piece on the top of this other piece, right? So I threw this piece right side up. So the spiral of throwing is actually going the opposite way of what it was to begin with. So I actually started at the base here at the top and moved my way down, so the clay kind of remembers that motion down to the rim. I don't have to reverse the wheel. What I'm just trying to explain is that I start from the top and I work my way down. Now from the bottom, I'm going to start from the bottom and work my way up to this rim, or to the middle, to the equator. All right, the way I'm holding this rib now is like this, pushing against the transition from the foot to the body or the belly. 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 10 rotations. I'm just holding the rib in the same spot, slowly waiting for it to respond And it will stretch, you just have to wait for it and look on the outside. So I'm looking at the silhouette of this. Now I'm moving up, and the outside rib is going to support and compress. And I want to get the belly expanded up to where the shoulder is. So this equator right here is the softest part of the clay. You just want to be very gentle. So I'm taking my rib out. And I think we're set. I like that form. I could go further, but for this demo, I'm going to stop. Now the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to add water just to the top section, but the way I do add water to it is I clean out my sponge. There's a little bit of moisture on there, and then I just run it over the surface. And what's happening is I'm creating a slip surface. I'm not drenching this thing in water because it will collapse and it will make it weak. So I'm just wetting the surface until I get a good slippy surface, and I'm going to wet my hands as well. And then wet the inside. And I'm pinching with my left hand, just like a pole. A little bit more water, a little bit more water. Just don't let any water drip down the surface. If it does, clean it up right away or rib it and you'll be fine. All right, so I'm gonna pinch this transition from the shoulder to the neck. I'm gonna pinch inward. Wait for the clay to respond. And now I'm putting my finger on the inside and supporting this transition. Get a little bit more water. If at any point the clay gets off center, what I would do is I would stop the wheel when it's closest to me and I would push the whole piece away from me until it recenters. That's just a small little trick. If it's starting to get off center a lot, maybe the bottom here needs more heat. And you can just heat the outside of it, or maybe it needs a little bit more time. I'm going to try not to cut too much off the top, and I'll use it in my favor. So I'm going to actually expand the shoulder higher, so it'll be about here down. So I'm going to use that rib tool again and expand it. So starting at the top, right here, and move down towards the equator. Holding the rib tool like this and using this edge to push upward. So right here, and then I'm going to go back in with my stiff rib, help compress. Stop there. And my final needle tool. Did I drop it again? Nope. I got it right here. I got it right here. All right. I'm going to cut this rim off at an angle inward, and then cut it off at an angle outward. So I have this nice kind of angled rim at the top. Very cool. Good surface. So now I'm going to wet the surface gently, just a little bit of water, and go over it with my rib tool, my metal finishing rib tool, which will actually just take all the slip right off. But I want a clean surface. So that helps solidify my smooth, clean surface. Remove the extra slip. Back. Finish it off. All right, any questions about this technique here?
Yeah, that big pot.
It's a big pot, so I'm gonna give you my
Especially for 14 pounds of clay. That's a really big pot.
yeah, my final measurements. So let's use another. Use this bat here to help me measure the outside or the height, which is okay. My final measurements are 13 inches tall. By about 14 inches wide. So using 14 pounds, I got a large pot. And when I take it off the wheel,
And
it's gonna feel light.
You'd all be surprised. I hope people can hear me, but you'd all be surprised at how light these are. We have one in the kiln right now, and when I picked it up bisqued, I was pretty blown away. Because normally, if I ever tried to throw something this big in one piece, the bottom would be 2 inches thick, and it would weigh twice as much.
Yes. It does come with a little bit more, like with your skill level. So you could still end up leaving a lot of clay at the bottom or at the top, which you could trim off and then make it lighter. But overall, this process keeps your pots thinner and lighter. And you can also get larger forms.
So we have two questions.
Mm-hmm.
Someone says, how do you finish the bottom after you remove it from the vat?
Oh yeah, that's a good question.
If you repeat it.
Yes. So the question is, how do I finish the bottom? Now I have a flat, wide opening. I could wait till it's leather hard, flip it over, and trim it, just like I would trim any other pot. The way that I finish these is I try and I give them kind of like a cut foot feel, and I take my trimming tool, not on the potter's wheel, but I just kind of circular cut a foot out so it looks a little bit more distressed. But you know, whatever your final look is, that's what I would choose to do.
And then someone asked, beveling the rim, is that just a design element?
Yes. So this cut edge and this cut edge is kind of a nice way to finish it. It makes it look less, I don't know, maybe less elegant. It makes it look more chunky or more, I don't know.
But that's where your personal style
Yes.
come in.
So personal style, yes. All right, so we have a 14-pound pot that I made, and we have the measurements that I just gave you. I hope that this really gives you the freedom. Let me put this down before I finish my last statement. I don't want to drop it. All right, with this throwing in sections part of the series of throwing, I really hope that this gives you the confidence that you may need to throw larger forms or break up forms into sections so that you can get them more efficiently or more creatively done. The personal style really comes as you develop these skills. So go ahead, try the same forms that I did, and then start adding your own twist. And I'm excited to see what you guys come up with for your own creations. And thanks again for being a part of this 3-part series, and we'll see you around.
All right, now we can add the caveat that we're gonna go back and unload the kiln if people want to stick around.
Yeah, do you think that there's going to be any more question and answer for this
Yeah,
section?
so if you have questions, I don't know if we can hear you, but say if you have any questions, pop them in the chat or the Q&A, and we may temporarily disconnect.
Yeah.
But we're gonna go back and unload the kiln live.
Yeah, does anyone have any more questions about this process for this series? If you do, throw them in the chat because we want to answer them live. If you don't have any more questions, you guys exhausted your questions, we are going to move on to another part. It's not going to be part of the series, but it's going to be something where we're unloading the kiln in the back with some glaze pieces, and that is another part of this collaboration series.
Kowalski weekend.
Yeah, the Kowalski weekend.
Someone says, are you going to dry it as it is, or do you have to wrap it with plastic overnight before drying it?
Same way you would dry any pot.
Yeah.
I would actually let this dry for an hour, cut it off the bat, flip it over, and then let it dry another hour. And then if I don't have time to wait around for it to dry, I would cover it in plastic and do it for the next day.
Yeah.